Okay, I think we'll kick it off now at this point. I'm Suzanne Fletcher, happy to be your host with Dan Slomski today. I'm a general partner with Prime Movers Lab. And just really want to start by thanking the folks joining us live today. And for those of you watching this later on asynchronously, we're welcoming our audience, who's made up of our limited partners, our investors, founders across the deep tech ecosystem, our extended Prime Movers Lab family, and a special welcome to our new LPs in our fund too. And so Prime Movers Lab, we are an early stage deep tech fund backing prime movers, people with the ability to positively impact billions of lives. 6 industry verticals in terms of the aperture we're lensing things through: energy, infrastructure, manufacturing, transportation, the future of computing, and longevity. And that is kind of the macro context for why we're doing these webinars, is to cover some of the sub areas kind of even within those industries that are really interesting in terms of the underlying technologies and the investment opportunities that are coming through those. Very emblematic of our Prime Movers Lab style, just bringing together industry experts, entrepreneurs, and creating a real community around what we're doing and sharing kind of knowledge with that community. This is our 6th webinar in a series that we're doing. And it's going to continue for the next 2 weeks, same time, same place. Next week, we're going to talk about longevity. So just a bit of housekeeping here. We're going to keep this to 1 hour and end at 1 o'clock Pacific promptly. And we will leave at least 15 minutes for questions at the end. You can just stick questions in the chat feature within Zoom. So with that, I'm just going to ask my better half, my partner Dan Slomski, to introduce himself, and then I will turn back to the panelists and start with introductions of them. Dan, you're on mute.
All right. Hi, I'm Dan Slomski. I'm one of the technical partners here at Prime Movers Lab. So I have a strong background in physics and systems engineering, and that kind of led me into a career in hardware R&D. Spent most of the last 20 years in hardware development teams, developing new products and new technologies. Through that work, automation, sensing, and data analytics kind of became some of my passions. And all of these concepts really come together in the agricultural space, where we have big acreage, big volumes, and big opportunities. So I'm really excited to talk with our panelists today to hear about what's happening in that sector.
Great, thanks, Dan. And so we're really excited to have these 3 entrepreneurs here to speak with you all today. And from a really high level macro framing, think of it as Shelley from Interplant is going to tell you where there is a problem in the field. Michael from Pyka, one of our portfolio companies in Fund 1, is going to tell you and apply very targeted chemical application only where it needs to go. And Kyle from Advanced Farm can then harvest that. So all different pieces within precision ag. I'm going to turn it over in that order and ask Shelley, Michael, and then Kyle to spend a minute or two introducing themselves.
Okay, thanks, Suzanne. So as you mentioned, Interplant, my name is Shelley Aronov. I've been in the US for 10 years now, my 3rd company. And what we do on Interplant is we give plants a voice. So what we do is we encode signaling capabilities into the plant's DNA. So as soon as it starts reacting to a stress, which is within 6 or 12 hours, in addition to that reaction that it activates to defend itself, it also generates a fluorescent protein in its leaves. And then we can see these fluorescent proteins from as far as satellite imagery, which is really our kind of secret weapon here. And the reason we do this is because by the time you can see a problem, you're talking about 2-3 weeks too late. So finding things at the inception means that we can reduce the yield loss and reduce the chemical use, and then provide farmers with kind of actionable recommendations to improve their operations.
Awesome. Yeah. Great to hear your introduction. I'm Michael from Pyka. I'm the CEO of Pyka. So little background on myself. I've been just deeply fascinated by aviation for my whole life, and have built planes from like little paper airplanes when I was a little kid to slowly getting bigger and bigger as I got bigger. So coming at agriculture from a kind of interesting venue where we were like, we want to do something really awesome with automated aviation. And as I'm sure you're all aware, airplanes play a role in ag, and actually a surprisingly big one. So what we're doing is making the world's first like large fully autonomous crop dusters, which is a pretty fun thing to work on. It's a pretty wild technology. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about anything relating basically to chemical use in agriculture. That's really like my area of expertise.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Cobb. I'm one of the founders of Advanced Farm Technologies. We're a startup based up in Davis, California, working on robotic harvesting for strawberries. And we are focused in particular on in-soil, soil-planted strawberries, which makes up most of the market here in California. We've been at it for just over a couple of years now. And in that time, I think we've become a leader in the space. If you drive by the strawberry fields anytime during harvest, you might see us in one of the fields picking hundreds of pounds of berries a day with our fleets. We're proud to be working with some of the leading growers in the space, and we're also really proud to have a couple of great investors behind us, and Yamaha and Kubota, who share our vision for becoming a autonomous farm equipment company for the 21st century. And thanks to Prime Movers Lab for having us today.
Dan, you're on mute.
I need to stop doing that. Agricultural technology or ag tech is a huge sector, right? So today I'd like to kind of hone in on what's referred to as precision ag, or what I kind of think of as digitized acreage. Let's really look at the field as a data map and figure out what we can do with that. So I kind of wanted to hear from each of you, like, what does precision ag mean to you, and what excites you most about the digital farms of the future? Let's start with Kyle.
Yeah, sure. I've always been really impressed with how resilient growers are and how insightful they are, and their instincts are always, really, really strong. And I think I see precision ag as sort of a way to further strengthen those instincts by presenting information and giving tools that they haven't had before. From the insights on the data side all the way through actionable insights using equipment, for instance. And one of the things that I'm really excited about, I think it's sort of maybe a ways away, but the systems level change that we'll see, kind of like the change that you talked about, Dan, in your white paper that we saw with broad acre crops last century. I think this next century, we're going to see a lot of really cool changes at the systems level, everything from genetics to cultivation, and ultimately, harvest and mechanization, and automation of a lot of those processes. And I think it's just going to make farms look really cool in a couple of decades.
Cool. Either you can jump in.
Shelly, you want to go?
Cool. How about you go, Michael?
I guess I can go next.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. So we have kind of two visions for.
We can hear you. Okay. Michael, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Shelly, we could hear you, just so you know. So I'll say my thing and then you go next. Yeah, so for precision, just like a couple anecdotes, I think, to make it kind of seem pretty real. So in the spraying world, bananas grown in Latin America suffer from this fungal infection called black Cicotoca. And what black Cicotoca does is it makes the plants ripen at sort of random times, which totally destroys the supply chain for bananas, because as soon as one box ripens, they all go. And so the way that it's dealt with right now is that plantation owners spray their field once per week. Just the entire plantation gets sprayed with a fungicide once per week, year round. So it's like 50 to 60 applications per year. And I think everyone knows that there's got to be a smarter way to defeat this fungus, but no one's figured out how to do it yet. And the same is true, some potatoes we were dealing with in New Zealand. There's this little bug that if the bug gets into the potatoes, it has a very good chance of ruining the yield, because they turn brown when you fry them. And so same deal there. It's like, okay, we don't know how to deal with this bug, so we're just going to spray the field every other week for the entire season. So I think the thing that's most exciting for me is just how do we leverage better sensing to accumulate a vast quantity of data And then how do we do something with that data that's intelligent in order to change the way that we're like dealing with these pests? I think there's a huge sense of optimism that like in the coming decade or two, there will be really, really like pinpoint solutions to like dealing with soybean rust or, you know, this black Secatoka. But we haven't seen that yet. So I'm excited for that.
Okay. So I guess I'll go next, and I'm just going to hope that everyone can hear me because my internet is really challenging. I guess precision agriculture to us is about plant-by-plant management, and also always being ahead of the curve because biology and nature evolves really quickly. So there's always going to be another disease, and as long as the next solution is always another chemical, I like using this analogy. We just saw Bayer launch a 5-way herbicide tolerant seed. It took us 20 years to get to that. And in that, we mean that the tank now has 5 different herbicides every single time they go out. You can imagine where the future is taking us. It's 15 herbicides in 10 years. So what we need is better data and essentially almost a democratization of data, because probably the worst fact about agriculture that I can think of is that all of the data we're collecting for all of our innovation and all of our trials is collecting over a few small plots. Anything that anecdotal will provide the data to support the existing system. What we want to do is transform millions of acres into data and then see what are the best practices year after year in every location so that farmers can choose the things that are best for them and their crops and their soil and not the things that are marketed to them. So hopefully that's the direction, you know, the whole industry will head in about 10, 20 years.
I love this vision of kind of digital acreage. And one of the things that we're thinking a lot about within this space is answering this question of the why now, right? Farming has obviously been around for quite some time as an understatement of the webinar. But kind of what specifically is enabling some of this revolution? Is it data collection, sensors, data manipulation, computer vision with it? Can you talk to us about some of the enabling things that have happened that make what's changing now possible and what makes this kind of a compelling area to invest in? Why don't we start with Shelley there due to internet to make sure that we can hear her, and then I'll turn over to Michael and Kyle.
Sounds good. So for us, timing is really about the technologies ripening to the place where they need to be and the industry not innovating for a very long time. So all of the chemicals we use today were invented or found out 50 years ago. And all the seed traits that we have in the field, the technology in the seed is about 25 years old. So the reality is that we're opening up a new opportunity here because the incumbents are not supplying the new products that we need. And I think there's also a flip side of this, which people don't think about enough, but it's really, where is this going? We have only so much arable land, and we all, our soil that's been building up for a very long time as this amazing resource that we're essentially ruining. So we have about 20, 30 years in order to change the existing system or not be able to use it. So I think that's why it's so pressing right now. And COVID was probably a reminder to a lot of people that these things are, natural systems are fragile. We need to take care of them today before they become unusable in the future.
Thanks, Shelley. I'll turn it over, Michael, for your perspective on kind of what makes investing in this area attractive in light of kind of the why now or the enabling technologies on the horizon.
Yeah, totally. So I think like on the technical side, it's just sort of the same broad strokes of like why you would invest in anything in robotics, where it's like, it's no one particular sensor has gotten a hell of a lot better. It's just like everything that you need to create a compelling robotic solution has gotten way better, or everything you need to process data that's like totally unstructured and come up with some genius conclusion out of it. Like that's gotten better. So I think there's huge forcing functions on the tech side. On the demand side, I think like a good anecdote is like Roundup. Roundup was just an absolutely ingenious solution to dealing with weeds, where like, I mean, this is one of the like most annoying parts of growing plants is that there's a whole bunch of other plants that also want to grow. And so what like Roundup Ready seeds do is it's basically like you can spray the nastiest chemical over your field, and the plant you're trying to grow doesn't care and everything else dies. Like that is sort of like the creme de la creme of like dealing with weeds. And for, I don't know exactly how long, I think it was maybe 15 years, it was like, okay, problem solved, we're out of the woods. But like resistance to Roundup is like so pernicious of a problem at this point that I think there's just this like looming sense of, I would say, sort of dread within the ag community, which is like this solution that we've used in the past, which are called systemic chemicals that like basically are super effective for a little while and then resistance forms to them, that's not really going to work in the coming, like, I don't know. I mean, it's already not working. And so it's like, what is the solution that's going to get us out of this? And I would say there isn't currently a like super compelling one. So in terms of an investment opportunity, like if there are people with a genuinely compelling solution to that, that's like a huge deal.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I mean, I think Shelley and Michael touched on this a little bit, but in addition to sort of the tech advancements, we're seeing increased regulatory pressure on growers as it relates to fewer chemicals or just making it more complicated to use them. And then on our side, we're seeing an increased just labor challenges, both with respect to availability and labor costs, right? Increasing in California, for example, minimum wage is increasing rightly for farm workers every year. And I think growers are just looking for opportunity. They can't pass that cost on to consumers in many cases. And so they're looking for ways to lower their input costs, control their labor costs, spread their fixed costs, and increase yields, and at the same time produce the same or higher quality fruit, right? In our case, so I think the demand has always been strong for labor replacement or supplement solutions, and it's only getting stronger. And I think it's really encouraging to see that the venture community has recognized that.
So if I could summarize those three perspectives, Shelley, you're mentioning that the seed tech and the plant tech hasn't actually changed in a couple decades. That there's room for innovation there. Michael, you mentioned that that automation is advancing, and there's lots of opportunity to kind of leverage that. And sorry, Kyle, I already spaced on yours.
Labor.
Yeah, free market and what's
Yes,
going on
yes.
with labor cost and the need to kind of get more out of the system.
Yeah, and the other one that was kind of coming to mind for me is following our webinar last weekend on microbiome and kind of soil health, how we've gone from 50 years ago there was 1 billion microbes per gram of soil, and today there's 10,000 microbes per gram of soil, and we've had a 100,000x decrease in the kind of the health and biodiversity in our soil. So there's just a real problem cropping up for us here, and with that kind of decrease in diversity in biodiversity, it starts to look like a problem that in need of some big solutions. So what emerging technologies or applications do you think will be making the biggest difference in the way we grow food in the short and the long term? You kind of mentioning like better chemicals, better plants, better cultivation methods, but what are some others besides maybe your each of your key offerings? Like what are you most excited about outside of your own company, and what might be the biggest commercial opportunities coming down the pipeline? Let's stick with that same order. That was working well. So let's go to Shelley first.
Sure. So I think when we talk about alternatives, and I really like Michael's notes about Roundup Ready, right? We all would love to have resistancy traits that have no resistancy developed, but that doesn't work that way. Nature evolves really quickly, and I saw the question in the Q&A. That's exactly the point. Nature will evolve faster than we can create the resistant seed or resistant treatment or resistant traits. We're just not as fast. But there are alternatives. There are so many people working on biopesticides and bioherbicides and molecular, microbial technologies and whatnot, and seed coatings. So the solutions are out there, but if you take them and you compare them one-to-one with the chemical will win. They have a holistic, better approach, but it doesn't work if you're just comparing them on a small scale. So we kind of believe that the future will take us there as long as we can collect data to show that farmers will get on board, both with better practices like cover cropping and rotations and no-till and so on, but also on the alternative products to chemicals that might take a longer time to come to fruition, but develop healthier soils and healthier crops.
Yep, that was basically my answer as well, in terms, especially from an investing perspective, like where I think you could make a lot of money. So like inputs on the chemical side are a fantastic business to be in. Like it doesn't cost much to produce them, and you sell them for a shitload. I think looking at chemicals that are like fall into the category of organics, where you're applying them frequently, and basically the like mode of action is that it just makes the plant like not that comfortable of a place for a pest. It doesn't like kill the pest per se, but it's so the nice thing about that is that it doesn't tend to form resistance. So I think like there are people working on that genre of chemical, and I think that there's going to be a huge opportunity there. I mean, it already is. So,
you know, I actually maybe this is I don't mean to provide a total contrast, but I'm really excited about genetics. I think that there's so many cool things to do with genetics. I mean, in strawberries, for example, the fact that breeders have figured out, you know, how to make stems longer and how to have fewer leaves and how to be disease resistant in certain areas. Now, I know that it's a constant evolution, but I think it's the ultimate way to sort of close the loop to the data we're collecting in the field. And the only other thing that I would say that I think is that I think we need to be realistic about a lot of these trends that we're seeing, and that there's a likelihood that it's not sort of one silver bullet and one thing, but it's actually sort of 100 little things. And I think as investors or as startups, if you're able to build a vision as to how all those 100 little things feed into you know, uniquely your value proposition, I think that's a really compelling argument. And it's not always the case for you know, if you're working on too specific of a problem.
And I want to invite all of you guys to have contrarian views to each other. You're being so well behaved.
Michael, I think we prepared before and we didn't know.
Yeah, totally.
And Kyle, kind of building on that point that there's, you know, 100 things that could become solutions, and perhaps not one kind of master solution here. But there's some very large incumbents in this space, right? We've already kind of talked about Monsanto and, you know, perhaps the concept that they sell seeds in order to sell Roundup, right? In terms of a business model. But when we think about those large incumbents and think about some of their incentives and motivations, how do you see groups like that interacting with the startup world? And where do you fall on kind of the optimism, or how where do they fall on the frenemy scale of things to kind of startups within precision ag?
Yeah, it's a fair question. You know, I think a lot of the farming system is built around 20th century innovations, and a lot of the biggest farming companies that we see are globally strong in a lot of areas, and have, you know, strengths in things like taking a product and making it universally successful around the world. But it takes a lot to take that kind of organization and change your mindset to be on the bleeding edge of innovation, right? The incentives just aren't aligned at all levels of the organization. So I think we've seen some examples of companies, those legacy companies, taking the buy versus build approach, starting with a smaller investment in some cases, and ultimately using a startup's progress to allow the big organization to make a step change to serve a new type of customer, or serve a customer in a new way that they could just never figure out in their current state.
Yeah, and Shelley, I'm very interested in your perspective here too, given that Interplant poses in some ways an existential risk to certain business models as they exist today.
Yeah, this is where I probably disagree a little bit with Kyle. I think, especially after the last round of consolidation, if we ever had genetic companies GM companies, all that stuff doesn't exist anymore. We have chemical companies, and those companies are over 100 years old, and their incentive is to sell chemicals. So the reality is that whatever they invest in is going to help them sell chemicals. And you can use every technology in whichever way you want to. You can use our technology to detect early and spray less, or you can use it to detect early and spray more, right? And send them to the field more often. So it is in the hands of the users and what it is that they want to promote. I think the reality is that, like every industry, there is a consolidation and there is a power shift that needs to happen. This industry is actually ripe for that power shift, especially after the last round of consolidations. And startups need to just stand on their own until they're ready to partner. If you partner too early here, it's just not going to be beneficial long term. That's my point of view.
I imagine that the catch and kill is what wants to be kind of avoided at all costs in terms of this innovation. And Michael, for you, I mean, you also put the power in the hands of users to use less chemical potentially. How does that interact with some of kind of these powerful blocks that exist, and how are you thinking about that kind of game plan that you need down the line?
Yeah, so thankfully it's working very nicely for us. So like the largest chemical producers in the world all see the writing on the wall that like in the coming decades, people are going to be using less chemical through some sort of more clever system of data collection and then basically only spraying where you need to. And so they're very eager to partner with companies that like enable that value proposition. And so we're one of them. They basically like, I think because it's not a true monopoly, it's sort of like they can't just ignore it or like try and crush anyone working on it. That's just impossible. So everyone is sort of trying to figure out what the value prop is. And then, yeah, the other place that it's worked well is like some companies use aerial application as a kind of like loss leader to sell their chemicals. And so having a product, you can't really run an airplane as a small farm. It's just way too complicated and too expensive. So having a product that like enables, medium-sized growers to actually spray by air poses an existential threat to these companies that are doing all their work by air. And so what we've seen is that they really want to partner with us in order to basically keep the monopoly in their hands and keep the best technology in their hands. The only folks that are an annoying incumbent are the actual like people who spray by air, who are like first and foremost pilots and absolutely love like that lifestyle. And they're understandandly like not interested in the industry moving away from a person in a plane.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's interesting that 10 years ago, for example, when it comes to fertilizers, it was impossible to go against the fertilizer companies. But what's interesting lately, the shift that I've at least noticed, there's such a monopoly on fertilizers that the companies not only control, demand changes, but they control supply. They can control pricing, and it is a limited resource. So they can actually create a benefit for themselves by knowing what's coming. They can literally increase the price to farmers and sell less. So I think it's happening. The shift is happening in a place where, again, I had some mentors telling me never touch the fertilizers only 2 years ago because they're in the market 10 years ago getting squashed.
Shelley, you're in an interesting place where your like Interplant's offering could really say you only need to treat this corner of your field. This is where the problem is at. Suddenly you only need to use a quarter of the chemical or whatever. That there's a really interesting contention there with the chemical companies, and I'm wondering if you have more to say about that, like how you kind of make friends of these large incumbents that in some ways you'd like to unseat. Either through smarter plant genetics or through just smarter, like better data.
How do you make this appealing to the large agrochemicals? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, how do you navigate that landscape where you're going to be kind of going head to head against them, or is there a subtle way that you can kind of turn them into friends?
Yeah, so early on, someone explained to me why the chemical companies are really interested in technology that enables early detection of fungus and insecticides or insects. We don't actually spray that much of them in the Midwest. And they're trying to move to something where it's an integrated acre. Farmers pay one price per season and they get the chemicals and everything they need because these suppliers can supply every input, right? This fits perfectly because in order to do that, you want to make sure that they're applying the right time and increasing yields. So I think the reality is that every technology is going to be used in the way that the owner wants to use it. We want to reduce use of chemicals, but it doesn't have to be used that way.
Okay, that's
I mean,
insightful.
For us, it's about maintaining independence and another interesting point that I think a lot of people I didn't know this for a very long time is that fungicides and insecticides are not or fungicides don't kill the fungus. They just prevent additional spray. If you really kill the fungus, it will also kill the plants. So we're all incentivized to spray at an earlier stage because we can't really take care of the problem as it is today with the tools that we have today. So hopefully eventually just all moves to that direction.
That's great. That's insightful that better detection might actually lead to, well, not necessarily more chemical use, but at least the right chemicals being used because they have better information on what pests or what pathogens might be present in the field.
It's a real analogy to what's happened in cancer, right? And much more kind of precision targeting. I think there's a real parallel to be drawn to kind of what we're seeing kind of in ag right now. Dan, should we talk a little bit about the kind of big farm, small farm aspect in the go-to-market here?
Yeah, Michael, what you were saying was a good segue into like kind of my next question on like, are these technologies that you're working on, or a lot of the precision ag breakthroughs, like are they mostly aimed at big farms? And what's the customer acquisition process like? How do you think about the right go-to-market in precision ag?
Yep. Well, for us, like, I don't know, every technology is probably a little bit of a pain in the ass to like actually implement, but ours is probably kind of far on the end of the spectrum of annoying because you have to bring an airplane to someone and teach them how to use it and whatnot. So early on, we're looking to partner with like the largest players in the industry. So like the folks who spray, over half of the bananas in Costa Rica, for example, or like the biggest banana producer. And that's just due to, for convenience sake, really.
Although there's even a way I could see your product specifically, like being able to fly and hit like just a yard, just little plots, 5 of them at a time, really precisely.
Yeah, potentially. I think like, I guess I'm just not really very like optimistic about the success of small farms. Just like if you look at how a medium-sized farm runs, it's like, I mean, your mind will just be absolutely blown by the equipment they have. These are like machines the sizes of small houses, and they just like make everything about farming very, very easy. So yeah, I guess I don't have a perfect answer. We're working with large folks initially just to keep the like cost of customer acquisition low. In the long run, the industry is already moving toward like farms are very, very high tech. That's not going to be a new thing, bringing technology to any of the medium-sized players.
Why don't I go next? I also really like that medium-sized grower, and I'll talk about it in a minute. But I think one thing that's been really encouraging for us as we're relatively new to farming is just how relationship-based the industry is, and I think it's really great for startups. I think a lot of growers are really willing to spend time with you and help you understand their problems and their industry and work closely with you as you iterate on your solution, right? And I think in our eyes, it's been much more important to develop deep relationships with those types of growers who are forward thinking, who maybe have a chip on their shoulder and want to become bigger and know that they need a breakthrough versus the bigger companies or the big farms who look really compelling, especially when you're talking to venture investors and, you know, everyone's really focused on addressable market and things like that. But it might also mean that you get caught up in middle management, right? Without someone who can really be an advocate for you and who can really help you get your business to that next level where you have a reliable product that, you know, meets the needs of a diverse set of growers.
Yeah, agreed.
What
I
would
don't
you
know if I
guys,
should.
you-
Yeah.
sorry, Shelley, do you want to go ahead?
No, it's fine. I don't.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I think within other parts of agriculture, we all have top of mind success stories, be it the Impossible Burger, things that immediately come to mind as kind of consumer changes and very visual successes. Within precision ag, what are some of the success stories or cautionary tales that the audience kind of listening and watching this webinar should be aware of?
Why don't I go first? Does that sound all right? You know, I think one thing that we found that separates our team is just our willingness to go to the field and work through really tough problems. I think you have to be willing to do that because you can fixate on all the wrong problems if you're not out there every day, sort of learning shoulder to shoulder. So I'd say that's maybe a watch out for anyone who's in the business is get out there and humbly learn beside your customers and really be responsive to their needs. And that will really, I think, accelerate your success versus thinking you know what the problem is or some part of the problem is and spending way too much time working on that.
Shelley, you want to go?
Yeah, I'm always like wondering about my internet connection. I'm gonna assume you can hear me. I agree. I think the key thing to agriculture is you have to be in the field, listen to your customers, be humble. They know what they're doing because they've been doing it for 40 years at least, right? The average farmer is 60, maybe it's been doing it longer. And they know what they need. I think and this is probably advice not just for agriculture, but deep tech as well. Don't fall in love with your technology. Technology doesn't matter. Go to your customers, ask them what they want, give them what they want, make sure that you can deliver that. They know what they want. And you can also test and make sure that what they want is actually, what they're saying they want is what they want. So when you ask about success stories, our success stories round up ready. We didn't like what it did to the world, but we loved what it did to the farmers. And they adopted it widely because of one thing that's been thrown around here that people just throw around, but it's really important. It made their life easier. Farming is hard and farms are getting larger and we don't want to farm us, right? So someone else has to. We have to make their life easier and then we can get the adoption that we want to see. And they will tell us that whenever we go to them. So just keep asking, you know, do you want to collect tissue samples? No. Do you want to go into the field and fly a drone over your field? No. What is it they want to do? Give them that solution. For us, it's let's put the trait in the seed. So when they buy the seeds, the sensor, let's collect the data from satellite imagery so that they never have to get involved. If it's something else, give them as a service. Never ask them to do the work. That's how you succeed, I think, in agriculture.
It's something I wonder about. We heard kind of how relational the business is and what the customer acquisition is like. Go out, work side by side with the customer. Is there somewhere where, you know, in my experience, working with people that have automation needs is they also have a lot of ideas on how to solve it, and it might solve their specific application. But is there a way that you kind of think about how to generalize what you're doing to meet a whole sector need rather than like the needs of one specific farmer, or is it that the needs of that specific farmer will probably mirror pretty well what somebody else wants to be doing in their field as well?
So kind of the distribution of customer needs and building, this is kind of the classic scaling problem that you would face in figuring out what your software features would be that you would offer. How does that translate kind of to these industries?
And like, yeah, ultimately, what product do you decide you want to roll out on a big scale? When you might have one customer that's being really a great advocate for one development path, how do you kind of sort out what you actually build?
So I think the reality is that we've standardized agriculture so much that everyone has similar problems depending on where they are, right? If you're in the Central Valley, you don't have water. Nothing is going to kill your plants because it's so hot and dry. And if you're growing soybeans, well, you're going to have 3 different problems depending where you are. But the genetics are so, everything's similar, right? So we're at the point where it's been standardized for us. If anything, we're probably going to give them a little bit more optionality with the new technologies. Is at least my opinion about this.
Yeah, I think the things that I had in mind in terms of success stories and failures kind of touch on this actually, where like, I think with ag, you want to be very, very specific, especially with your first product. So like fantastic failure is like drones just generally, that like the value proposition was like, okay, you're going to fly your drone over your field and you're going to get data and you're going to make some decisions out of that. Like that is it's a terrible value proposition. Like what it needed to be was, it needed to be like a soybean farmer will fly their drone over their field. They will collect this data, which will tell them how to change like this specific thing about the way they grow. And that will save them this much money. And so I think like, what I would definitely be looking for in any sort of ag tech company is like, have they found a particular niche within ag that has just an extremely intuitive value proposition? Because if it's not extremely intuitive, it's probably a terrible idea. Like you aren't going to try and come up with this like global, like, you know, one size fits all, we've solved ag kind of idea. It's going to start in a very particular way. And then grow from there. That's at least my opinion on it.
And Michael, kind of building on that, when you see a company that's developed that value proposition, how are you seeing within kind of precision ag business models be built around that in terms of who you're selling to and what becomes kind of the palatable, if it is hardware as a service or if it is much more of a lease model? How are you thinking about your customers' ability to pay and to share that kind of ROI proposition with them?
That's a good question. I mean, so like the success story that I think is most interesting that probably very few people know about, there's a drone company in China called XAG that makes an agricultural spraying drone. It's about, it's like 10 feet roughly in span. And it is just like absolutely phenomenally successful. They sold 25,000 of them in 2019 and are expected to sell more than 50,000 of them this year. So I think in China, there's something on the order of 100,000 drone operators for spraying. And I mean, for them, the value proposition was really obvious. It was like the plots are super small and the cost of labor is so low that the way that people were spraying was like with a backpack full of chemical going around, like waving a spray nozzle, or like literally with a hose wandering through a rice farm, like doing this sort of like waving motion to spray. So I don't know, in terms of like how they sell it, because it's an intuitive value proposition, they've been able to sell it to everyone. It's like, there's a lot of money within ag. Yeah, I don't have a more profound answer to that.
Yeah, maybe I'll just ask Shelly or Kyle if you guys have any thoughts on that, what you've seen working in terms of the specific business models as it relates to this customer base.
Yeah, sure. So I would say one of the lessons that we learned actually in a prior business, but I think it's a key lesson for us, and it was don't sort of ask someone to write a check that they're not used to writing, or if you're going to ask someone to write a check, make sure that there's a budget behind it. So a good example is you think you're going to go sell someone a robotic strawberry harvester, right? But they don't have it in their mind that they're going to.
It's not already a line item.
Yeah, right. And so you have to find ways to integrate with their operation by maybe taking some risks on and having a variable revenue model where your incentives are shared by how much fruit you pick, for example, and then slowly you transition to a more mature model, like an equipment lease that they're more used to as their confidence grows. But I think you can really reduce a lot of the friction by just keeping in mind how their current mindsets for how they manage their finances and trying to slot into an existing line item, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Shelley, do you have any thoughts there? And then I'm going to turn it over to Q&A. We've got some questions coming in.
Yeah.
Really exciting ones.
I guess my last note would be similar. I've heard founders saying that they had problems if they, if the person that's going to reap the benefits is not the person that's going to write the check, that's a big problem. And it's sometimes that, if it's a CapEx investment, for example. So for us, it was about being in the seed. Farmers pay for inputs. That's what they're comfortable with, not for data. So we're just going to create a business model that they say they're comfortable with.
That makes sense. And so we'll turn it over to Q&A now. A couple questions coming in. A reminder, just put your questions in Q&A, and Dan and I will queue them up. One that's very topical, so I think I'll just start with this here, is how do you see agriculture and innovation for the post kind of COVID landscape? And also with respect to kind of the climate crisis, how do you see agriculture innovation? So both kind of how has COVID changed this, and then how does the climate crisis and what we're facing as a society kind of impact innovation here?
Why don't I start? This isn't exactly a softball, but I'll do my best. So, I think, like I said at the beginning of the call, I'm always really impressed with how resilient growers are. We were out during the COVID crisis, as farming is an essential business, as you all know. And we were out trying our best to, contribute what we could with robotic harvest of strawberries, because demand just sort of didn't go down. In fact, in some cases it went up, but the supply was really constrained because the laborers had their own challenges, right? And we're trying to conform to the new world. And so I think there is, to some extent, a sustained focus, let's say, on automation as a way to help bridge the gap that became exceedingly clear as part of COVID. When I say gap, I mean the labor gap and supply gap. But I really see growers as being very resilient, and it seems like there's no sort of problem that they don't work their way through. So I don't see any big changes from our side on how people were starting to address these problems, even going into COVID.
Any differing viewpoints to that, or different experiences on kind of post-COVID landscape, and then continuing on our existential sense of dread, talking about the climate crisis and the implications for agriculture?
Yeah. I tend to agree. I mean, nothing's changed in agriculture during COVID. Everything's business as usual because it has to be. I think the climate crisis is one that I find more fascinating, is that we have to change the equation. Otherwise, we'll just create a worse solution for everyone. And that equation is not going to change in the direction we're heading today. So we have to we can wait for regulation. Someone asked me that yesterday, if I'm betting on regulation for pushing our products more, to the front. Maybe, but I wouldn't bet on regulation. I think we just have to provide solutions that make life easier, but then also drive the right products into the market, because we just don't have the tools available. There's not going to be a better agricultural system because there's nothing currently in the pipeline from the industry. And then what happens with our, carbon emissions and soil health and arable land and deforestation in 20, 30 years is something that we don't want to think about, but it's real.
Yeah, I agree with both of those answers.
And kind of next question on here, where I think I'll start with Shelley, just given Interplant, is, there's some initiatives that are focused on modifying the seed, right? So that you don't have to put chemicals on the plant themselves. How do you see that kind of seed treatment versus plant treatment? How do those two opportunities compare, and where are we technologically with respect to those two things?
Right, so here's the thing about resistance to traits or resistance breeding. Nature takes about 4 to 5 years to evolve. So I think one of the problems that we had is that the traits that we found 25 years ago were magical: Roundup Ready or herbicide tolerance, and then BT, which is essentially generating the insecticides in the plant, were magical. And then over time, resistances happened and the value went down. Now we're not seeing anything new because it's really hard to do this. And it seems like everything next in line has a really big penalty on yields and other kind of production elements. So even if we can find it, and it takes us 10 years to find something like that, and then it takes nature 4 years to evolve, we're just not going to get there. I think seed treatments are great. They show a lot of value. Part of the issue is that it's really, again, biological systems. Understanding the mode of action of your product is incredibly hard, and a lot of times that's where things start falling apart. So we just need to drive a more holistic solution. There's not going to be any more magical traits. There's no more Roundup Ready. I think that's a reality.
Well, and Shelley, I really think your technology is interesting and differentiated in the space that you're engineering the plants not to be more resistant or something that nature is going to compensate for. You're engineering the plants to have a voice, to tell us that they're stressed and they need attention, and then we can bring in mechanical interventions or chemical interventions as needed with something like Pyka spray technology, or Kyle, even like down the road when you guys are doing I'm not going to volunteer you for things, but weed pickers or any other number of other like intelligent and plant by plant interventions that you could do. Today you're berry picking, but 5 years from now you might be weed picking to like make spray obsolete. And I know there's some other companies working on similar technologies in that space, and that's something that as a roboticist I get really excited about, where maybe chemicals aren't the answer, and maybe nature continues to stymie our genetics work, but there's a lot we can do with machines and robotics yet, that kind of untapped territory. But hardware is big and expensive, and we need some more advances in that areas too.
Yeah, I'm with you, Dan. We're really excited about automation, obviously, and robotics. And I would just say, there's a lot of talk about vertical farming, and I think some of that has merit, but there's also a lot to be proven out. And I just, I hope that the same level of investment and same level of attention is given to horizontal farming and automation on that sort of level, because I think there's a huge potential there to not totally transform the farming system and provide one of those really big step changes using more or less what we have today. So.
Thank you for that. We've got another question in the chat. I want to make sure I read. Let me go to the one after this and just ask Dan to clarify something. But so how do you think that macronutrients fit into the precision agriculture space? Kind of how much fertilizer or irrigation change to reduce the need for chemical treatments?
So I guess the question is, can we improve on nutrients, maybe? I hope I understood it correctly. So this is something I find really fascinating. All of the nutritional curves that we have for agriculture, that's the recommended amount of nutrients that soybeans and corn need, were developed in the 1970s in a few universities in the US based on very limited data. We know we overapply, we just don't know exactly how much. And we really need to figure out what the right nutritional curves are. And the thing is, people say, let's ask farmers to do A/B testing. Put this much nitrogen here, this many seeds, figure out your yield, do something different in the next row. That will never happen. But the reason that we're actually putting nutrient efficiency as one of our sensing capabilities is because of that. There's really no value in the first seasons for the farmers, because they will overapply to make sure that they continue to get their yields. But there's evidence from academia that you can stress a little bit of nitrogen and a little bit of phosphorus and you still get high yields. So I think the reality is that once you can correlate how much that is, you can really redesign for the next generation.
And do you guys see, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there definitely is a strong school of thought relating to improving soil health in order to reduce chemical use. So that's, yeah, certainly something to research more. Go ahead.
I think we're going to probably wrap it up after this. So if you do have any more thoughts, this would be.
Yeah, kind of like final thoughts from each of you. Why don't we end with that?
One final thought that I'll pose that I think is an interesting one. I have no answer to it, but something Shelley mentioned where it's like a lot of the way ag is done is sort of heuristically a little bit, where it's like, well, this is how much fertilizer I applied last season and that worked pretty well, so I don't really think I'm going to change it. It's interesting that that's how it's done. And then it's also interesting how a lot of farmers run their own sort of crude experiments. And so I don't know what the solution to this is, but it definitely seems to me like there's some sort of opportunity for a like larger scale scientific method applied to ag, where it isn't like, 40,000 farmers across the US trying to figure out how best to grow their soybeans. They come up with good solutions, but like, I think intuitively it seems like there's got to be something better. So it'd be really, really cool if you ever run into a company that's like thinking about that specific problem. It seems like that could have a lot of merit.
My final word is aimed at Dan and Suzanne and others, investors on the side. I would just say be prepared to be patient with your investments. These are really hard problems, and it's a really relatively slow-moving market. And I would just say, the vision is big, and the change that we can make is really big. And I think the returns or potential for returns is enormous. But please be prepared to be patient.
Great insight.
I
Shelly.
don't feel like I have a really great insight. So instead of a great insight, I'll just say, because of the last question I saw, that I think we just assume that efficiency comes at scale, because that's what happens in a lot of the industries we know. The most efficient kind of agriculture was when people just farmed their own little plot in the backyard 200 years ago. But the reality is that none of us want to farm anymore, and that's okay. So we're just going to be with the system of probably very likely monocultures and very large agriculture. And we have to figure out all the tools that we can provide farmers to be able to do better and, get more out of their operation, and then efficient, and then eventually sustainability will also follow. Or we can go back to farming.
We'll each have our own plot of land. Well, if anything, this conversation has made me want to wash my fruits and vegetables from Safeway a little bit more tonight. So thank you guys very much for that. But thank you three so much for shining a light on the important work that you're doing. This is very much about what kind of Prime Movers Lab is about. Amplifying the voices of entrepreneurs doing really important work to help billions of people across the globe. So I apologize that we didn't get time to get to every question in the chat, but thank you so much to the audience who participated and the folks that will be watching it later on. Thanks again, and stay tuned on the exciting stuff kind of coming on Precision Ag here.
And
Signing
then,
off.
and then next week, same time.
Same time, same place, longevity.
Great.
Awesome.
Great speaking
Thanks.
with you.
All right, guys.